Today I'm talking to Shana Pereira, who is the founder of a medical crisis centre. And Shana, you moved from Darwin, Australia to California, America, and you made that move some 20 years ago. Thank you very much for joining me today.
Thank you, Claire. I'm excited to be here and talk about this topic. I think it's fascinating.
Fabulous. Thank you. And I thought we could zone in on the fact that you moved to America, but prior to that, your family moved from East Timor to Australia. And the reasons for moving are always quite different. And so I'd like to kind of look into greater detail with you. I'd like to start by understanding what prompted your family to move into Australia, that perhaps was the undercurrent to then you being willing to move countries yourself.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the question. So, my family is from a country called East Timor, both on my mom and dad's side. And East Timor was invaded in 1975 by Indonesia, and it was previously a Portuguese colony. So, even before the invasion of Indonesia, we were already had immigrants and migrants mixed into the fabric of East Timor, Chinese merchants, of which one was my great grandfather, and then the Portuguese explorers. And that happened to be my grandfather's side that came from Portuguese heritage. So already in East Timor, it was very mixed culturally. And then when Indonesia invaded in 1975, they invaded because there was a pocket, or there is a pocket of natural gas and oil
Mm.
that's valued into the billions of dollars against this little tiny group of islands in the middle of the South Pacific. And so my family was forced out of the country to survive. And the closest town in Australia to East Timor is Darwin, which happens to be this little outback town. And it is really the fullest expression of what it is to be in the real outback of Australia. So the cultural mix in Darwin is super interesting because it's the closest town to Asia. So we in Darwin, there happened to be a lot of Vietnamese people that came over, a lot of Thai infusion, my family from East Timor. And in 1975, Darwin had a cyclone which completely abolished the entire city. So there was now Greek and Italian cultures that had come up, and the city was rebuilt by a lot of the migrants that had moved in. So then I was born in 1980, and I was already exposed to this world of people being forced out of their country and then being forced to learn English as a first language and assimilate to this outback town where it's always hot and it's either raining or not raining. And then here we were, a big melting pot of all different cultures with over 50% Aboriginal, native Aboriginal people as well. So it really, the town itself lent itself to, there's a whole world out there. And we were lucky enough to be exposed to so many different places and aspects just by the people that were living in the town. So I
Mm.
think that's where my seed of exploration came from, of
Mm.
like, there's an entire world out there that I want to experience.
Mm.
Um, and the last thing I'll say on it is my family were political activists. And so it was really important to my mother and my father that I learned about the culture of the world. I learned about the struggles of different countries. It mattered to them. It still matters today. We laugh because I'm in a family where, we can't just eat spaghetti. We have to learn about where did spaghetti come from, who created it, what's the background, what's the cultural significance. We're very attuned to that. So I was really lucky to be born into a family that was connected to the world, even in 1980, where, you could only send mail in the mailbox
Mm.
and there was only a limited amount of what you saw on TV. So we had to
Yeah.
just really learn about it intentionally through meeting people.
That's amazing. Thank you.
Thank
Um,
you.
I find it fabulous that your parents had this outlook because East Timor is a tiny island and they could have had a very different approach to life or interest in the world. They wouldn't necessarily have had to look globally. And just for the benefit of our listeners and viewers, I just want to locate East Timor. It's south of Indonesia and kind of southeast, I suppose, of Singapore, and north of Australia, which is why Darwin is that easy entry point. Um, and so I'm kind of fascinated by their approach and how this kind of washed over you and influenced you. So would you say more about that? Because I wouldn't say it's necessarily um, prevalent in Australia to have a global outlook. So them coming in with a global outlook, how did that fit in, or how did they influence people that they were intermixing with?
Yeah, it's really interesting. I really appreciate the question. Um, I think when you are a stand for human rights, the definition of human was palpable in our house, from my grandfather to my grandmother to all of them, because, they had just been forced, if I can do a bit of assumption on what it must have been like for them, they'd just been forced out of a home that was for them very sacred. It's a healing space. It has some of the world's most prevalent superfoods that just grow everywhere. It was like this little piece of paradise. And then they're put into a city that has just been completely demolished and has just survived a cyclone by the grace of God. And they had to melt. There was all of these people in suffering that had just lost everything, including them. And half didn't speak English. They all spoke different languages. So they had to get a common understanding quickly, even just to exist and to support each other. And so I think when you're thrown into that, there's a deep appreciation, and their stand for human rights lives to today. That even though East Timor has been a free country for 20 years and it's the newest country of the millennium, they still have a focus on human rights around the world, because I believe that you're most vulnerable, in your most vulnerable state, is where language doesn't matter, country barriers don't matter, where you were born really barely matters, right? You come together with a common suffering that is an equalizer. And at that point is where you feel the most human ever.
Mm,
It makes it really easy to connect with others, to say, I'm experiencing this, you must be experiencing the same. And as we know, it doesn't take words, it takes heart and openness, which can be in any language, right? It removes the language barriers.
mm,
So they, in their struggle to assimilate, they all supported each other. And it was reflective in high school for me.
mm,
I had a group of 20 people that we were all from all different backgrounds, and we just loved each other and had fun. And the differences were never anything more than, can your mom cook milfay? Because she's awesome at cooking that. And she'd cook an amazing Greek dish that we'd all fall in love with. Or, my mom would cook a Portuguese dish or whatever that looked like, such that it was food that joined us together, right? That allowed us to learn about different cultures.
mm,
So I think the summary of that, I believe, is that if a person has their eye on what it is to be human, you can really cut across um, language barriers, borders, country borders, and pair that with a really deep curiosity to understand that person's culture and where they came from. I really do believe that's the formula for world peace, personally.
completely. Yeah, it's really interesting how you clarify everything and shape everything. And you reference children. And I think that's quite important because, you know, when you talk about who you were being as teenagers and young people, you're not food or people's homes or they're all points of interest.
Yeah,
That they don't necessarily need to be points of contention. And in my own upbringing, you're having me reflect briefly and making me see that most of the points of contention were actually introduced by parents through the parents to the child, not from the child to the child,
right.
if that makes sense. And so in terms of these, when we're talking cross culture, you know, I'm specifically talking about cross cultural differences and things like that. Children seem to find things fascinating in my childhood until maybe an adult reference point put another spin on it, which then might create a form of tension or confusion for the children involved, including myself. So it's lovely to hear your take on this kind of mini global United Nations in your school of, you know, of everybody just taking an interest and also what I find interesting is you talk about your parents losing their home, you know, in this paradise, but they created a home, and it seems like each family created a home and each home welcomed children, no matter where those children came from. So there seems an interesting distinction that you're pointing to of what home is,
Mm.
as well. Is there anything you want to say more about that?
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. The United Nations of my school is a really great way. That was definitely the experience. And I think I believe I do have a different definition of home. I really do feel like it's about the people that I'm surrounded by, especially in this world of virtual access. You know, almost all of us being forced into it with a global pandemic. Um, and the ability to build those cross-cultural relationships, no matter where you are, through the lens of who are the people that really are sourcing you, are expanding your perspective. You know, I even like to take on who are the people that I disagree with to develop my ability to have a deeper understanding. I personally relate to it like it is my accountability to do so, especially given my family background. You know, they had to build a very fast community and bond through not even speaking the same language. So, given that English has been a real privilege, at least for me, and the ability to communicate with many others who might be from a different background, but we all speak English. I feel like it's kind of my duty to, you know, be interested in something I disagree with or don't understand to really get like, what is the cultural nuance? Like, where did that come from? And so I do believe that you can build home wherever you are, which has given me the perspective of being able to live wherever I want for whatever reason, sometimes no reason, and just having that feeling of, I think I need to be there, which is kind of how I came to LA. It was just like a moment in time where there was a job in a newspaper that said work and live in Los Angeles and represent Darwin and the Northern Territory, which is the state that I'm from. And I thought, that's not real. Like, who's going to go to LA and represent my hometown? I was really blown away. And then I just had this niggling feeling of like, this is you, you go.
Mm,
And that's how my journey started. So I didn't necessarily have like a game plan that I wanted to move to America, but it was just this feeling of a moment where I thought, I think this is for me. And I couldn't quite put my finger on it. I
mm,
just knew enough about, you know, some people call it intuition, some people call it the universe, serendipity. For me, it's a message from my intuition is defined for me as a message from my higher power. And even at a young age, I learned to operate with my intuition without needing too much explanation or definition.
mm.
And that was one of those moments. And I just thought, I think it's going to work. I had $500 and the job paid $18,000 a year, which is nothing in the scheme of things, right? But I thought I'll go for a year and see what happens. So that was the game plan at the time.
I love it. And I'm very curious, why was there a job opening wanting a representative from Darwin?
Yeah. So what was beautiful about it is there is an entire tourism industry for Australia here in America. Australia and America have a really great relationship, especially in the travel industry. And so this was for to represent the tourism board here in America. And every state in Australia has a tourism board here because Americans really love to travel to Australia, which is amazing. I believe it's the third largest country of travelers into Australia. And Australia is a beloved destination vacation here in America. So that's why there's tourism boards that represent it. And I had the real pleasure of working in the Australian tourism industry for 10 years. I represented Australia's Great Barrier Reef and Queensland, which, as you know, is a global icon. Um, and so I really had the best of both worlds, where I was in a moment of integrating into American culture, which was completely different. And then California to the rest of America, it was just completely different. So I had the privilege of doing that while working in the Australian tourism industry. So I got both.
Mm,
There's a lot of veterans that have immigrated years ago. So I'd say, what is this? Or how do I maneuver that? And I had this really beautiful community of this blended two cultures that really supported me to integrate here, which again,
mm.
I think is important, right? A little bit of home and then a lot of unknown to kind of balance out the two.
Mm. Yeah, it's quite incredible that you had that job because it's really a bridge. It kept you connected to Australia and actively engaged and interested in Australia, but exploring it from the perspective of the client who would be predominantly American. So, very interesting way of immersing yourself into a new culture.
Yeah, it was a real privilege. And I mean, I was surrounded by so many amazing people that had already done it.
Mm,
And so they were able to say, don't live here, live here. Or you're going to like it much more over there. Because I didn't know. I mean, Los Angeles has 83 cities in one county. So I really didn't know anything. I'd never been to America on a vacation. I barely did any research. Once I decided to come, I thought, I've decided now. When I get there, I'll figure it out. And again, I think that came from my ancestry
mm. The
of
fact
just like,
that everybody's been willing to move
yeah,
in your
and
DNA.
exactly. And the focus on the fact that you can build a community anywhere. And luckily, everyone spoke English. So that part I thought, okay, that's easy. Different kinds of English, but close enough. So yeah, I think that's what gave me the courage to move was seeing the amazing ability my family had in what was the most vulnerable and stressful times in their lives to be able to assimilate and build community around them with so many amazing people.
Mm. And that is something that you continue to do because clearly, as the founder of a new medical center, crisis center, that's something you're actively doing. So without moving territory, it's still another example of how you build community.
Exactly. And what was really amazing about it is throughout my 20 years in advertising and marketing, my specialty has been galvanizing people with common culture, whether it's sneakerhead culture or, car culture or video game culture, where in those subcultures of what we would call them, I call them the major cultures, but the subcultures of that surpass race, nationality, origin of birth, age, it surpasses all of the demographics to be a true passion and especially video gaming. I don't know if it's a passion. It's probably more, way more than a passion, right? That bonds people. There's common language that, in video game culture, there's a completely different language. There's
mm,
a whole different way of being that surpasses all of that, that almost brings back humanity in the context of this video game world, that when you enter it, you're in this entire different universe. So that it was really expressed in all of my work as well, not intentionally. It just happened to be like that. So yes,
mm,
now in the medical crisis company, it's very similar because there's a moment that people are all at their most vulnerable and suffering in a moment of real doubt of the future. Their future is just blown up, and they're suffering.
mm,
And it's a human equalizer. Suffering didn't care who you were 5 minutes ago. Medical crisis doesn't care where you came from, where you were born. It's that moment when you're terrified, um, that brings people together
mm,
greater, in a greater and a faster pace, and doesn't require language. You can see it in that person, you can feel it,
mm,
and it's familiar.
mm. Yeah, it's extraordinary how you're painting a picture of things that totally transcend the differences. And what did you call it? Common cultures?
Yeah,
When mm,
exactly. Common cultures and their equalizers. Like there's these
mm,
moments of emotion that become an equalizer. And I believe whether it's a, quote unquote positive emotion or a negative, I believe all emotions are relevant and needed and beautiful in my world. Um, because they give us a moment to connect, whether you're elated or suffering, it gives you a moment to connect beyond demographics.
mm. Yeah,
And I think that holding on to that, you really can move anywhere.
yeah. I think it also shows or is a demonstration of what's possible. When you think if you can transcend the differences, much like your experience at school, then it was through food, then now it's through video games. If you can transcend what we determine as differences that should separate us, then you're actually putting everyone you're finding that place where everybody can share in it together. And obviously, it's not great that people are sharing in suffering, but nonetheless, you are providing in your current field um, that departure for people to not have any barriers from who they are or and certainly in the medical field it is possible to feel a barrier because you're from a different environment or you don't speak the language so well or something like that, so to be able to feel that you can transcend any barrier, that sounds quite remarkable for what you're out to create, what you're creating.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Where that has come from for me is I was, a very successful advertising and marketing person, executive. I was really blessed and privileged to have met the right people along the way that believed in me, that gave me chances that wouldn't normally be afforded to others without very specific criteria and background and education. And in that process, I went home on Christmas 2015 to celebrate in Australia. So I hadn't been home for a few years, and I thought this is the moment to go and take a break. And there on Christmas Eve, I found out my kidneys were failing. And it was somewhat easy in Australia because I'd grown up there. I knew the medical industry, I knew how it was going to work. But then a few days later, I needed to come back to the US. And this was after I'd already been here over 10 years. I
Mm,
needed to come back and learn this entire subculture called American medical. Like learning American culture was fun, was amazing. American medical was a nightmare for me. it was like, I'm going to die if I don't figure this out because they're speaking a completely different language and I'm in a crisis. Like, I need help today and I have no clue what they're saying. I'm a successful person who feels like she knows how to understand all these languages around the world. And that was the moment where I thought, do I need to move home? Like, is this it? Is this my stint in America? Like, I can't do this. I can't learn a whole subculture when I'm like in danger of dying. And I think that's where the realization of humanity really imprinted. The other stuff was fun. I loved learning. We're eating food together that I've never eaten before. That was fun. And then this was like, you might die if you don't assimilate to this medical industry quickly. If you don't learn the terms, the language, the prescriptions, the how the pharmacy works. And that's where I went to work on. I'm the perfect person for this because of my background. I'm going to learn the language of this medical system and I'm going to support especially those that don't speak English, that don't have the means that I have, that aren't set up like I am in this moment to maneuver the medical industry so they don't have to learn all of this from scratch. They can take everything I've learned about my move from happy life into medical industry to actually get clear and so that they can work on just being able to just heal or be sick or however they feel in that moment without the added pressure of I've got to also learn this new language called medical. And so
Mm.
that's where the existence of the company has come from.
That is so phenomenal because as someone coming into America, it is immensely challenging because, much like you reference food, whatever a country's medical structure is unique to that country, and you
Yes.
kind of grow up knowing it to whatever degree you know it. Maybe had a stint in hospital as a child through, I did, so you kind of know it how you know it, so to speak. But when you come into a country and you quickly learn the differences and it's dependent on insurance and the different things, but you can know a phrase, oh, it's dependent on insurance, but you have no idea what that means. So every aspect of it is complicated. So you're touching on a highly important point that an immigrant, I certainly have been healthy in my 2 years of being in the States. So I have totally overlooked setting those things. I have insurance, but not having everything fully set up. Um, but you can't rely on good health. So I think you're pointing to something incredibly important.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And, it really is like, I want to say the underbelly of a country, right? Like
Mm,
sometimes there are these things that are unexpected. But, the biggest message for me though is those things get worked out. I'm a huge advocate of people going and living somewhere else for even a year, just to expand your experiences, the possibilities. There are countries where they don't have to lock the door, which sounds crazy, right? Here from America, it's like there is no way. But just to experience what it would be if you could live in a country where you don't have to worry about your door being locked, something just even that simple can reshape your entire thought process for how and what is important in your life. How do you want to live literally every day? And it kind of sorted out for me what's important to me.
mm,
Like at the crux of it, what do I really want? What's actually important to me to feel like I'm at home, to feel like I'm not watching over my shoulder every 5 minutes, right? That for me is home when I can just breathe, be relaxed with no concerns, like all of that. And so I believe you can generate that anywhere. So I highly encourage everyone listening that if it's been on their mind or they're curious about it, pick a place. Just go for 3 months, 3 months, or even
mm.
a month. Like that over that 21-day period, it starts to feel like, okay, like I can do this. Right? But I
Absolutely.
highly encourage it. I think it really just expands and broadens what could be possible for you. Even if you come back to your hometown and live there, you just forever change. Like once you can't kind of unsee things, you
Yeah,
know?
it's so true. You can't unsee what you've seen.
Yeah, and it
Yeah,
imprints in a really
yeah,
beautiful way.
yeah, totally. And if I can just go back to your medical experience, obviously we're very glad you're still here today, even though you were on the brink of something there.
Thank you.
The 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 journey you went through, like you say, now you're going to bring this accumulation of knowledge that you had to acquire, but you had to acquire it at speed because your situation, if it's kidneys, is urgent. So, what was that experience like for you, if you don't mind me asking, to, and how did that influence your relationship with America in living in America? Because obviously there was the temptation to go home, but you didn't go home. So how did you transition through that time?
So that's a great question. What I did, actually, I'll take a step back. What I was known for in my career was building high-powered, passionate, excited teams filled with high achievers that could work together, which, as we know, is touch and go in the best cases. But I was able to build that equalizer, that humanity that made space for the things that each of us were weak at and highlighted our strengths and brought us together like a United Nations, all different perspectives, all different diverse beliefs. We agreed, we didn't agree, but we brought it all together in a very constructive way. That's what I was known for, which obviously makes sense given my background, right? Like I was used to having very different people come together and talk about something they were all passionate about, find the commonality to solve a creative issue or solve an issue creatively, rather. So I was known for that. And so the minute I got it wasn't the minute I got sick. I was going to say the minute I got sick, but it wasn't. It took a few days of me being in shock. And then I had this 20-hour flight to fly back to America. And I again felt like I was immigrating all over again because it was like, I, I don't know what to do. I don't even know who to talk to. I don't know what to do. So on the flight back, I sat down and wrote out what are the belief systems that have gotten me to this point? How come I didn't go to a doctor before? Why didn't I have a primary care physician? Why wasn't I more interested in setting myself up on this? And I started to see my belief system. I hated the doctors here. I just, it was so uncomfortable because I didn't understand it. Um, I didn't understand insurance. So I just put it to the side and I'll figure it out when I need it. I just avoided the whole thing because it was beyond my understanding and I didn't feel I needed to learn it at the time because there was nothing wrong with me. So once I figured that out, this was the way that I built teams. I then went and wrote, who are the doctors? Like, what type of doctors do I need around me if I'm going to have half a chance of surviving this? And I developed my criteria personal to me. I just inherently knew that UCLA and Cedars had some of the top doctors in the world. That just seemed to be like public knowledge. So I thought, okay, well, I want a doctor who's studied at both. Because if I've got half a chance of surviving, I need both. And given I lived in LA, I thought, wow, that's a privilege. So immediately I thought, I want to be in LA. I don't need to move home because I think like this is where the best doctors are. And maybe I was put here for a reason. I just didn't know until right now. I really believe in that. Like I believe things have a way of working themselves out in a divine order. So I just started to write down what else do I want about that doctor? I want a doctor who's curiously engaged in a way that they can't sleep unless they solve problems because that's how they are. Not because of me, but that's just how they are. And I want doctors who have a kindness and compassion for what they do, that they're very present to, because that's how they are. Not because I'm nice, not because I'm great, but because they're just born like that. That's their magic. And so that was the start of how I interviewed doctors. And I did it exactly like I would in corporate America. Where I was like, You're amazing at your field. You've got all the right experience, but I'm just not feeling like we're really connected. So let me see who the second best is. Because second best can still save my life, but maybe they've just got this, energy that I gel with, or they're way more curiously engaged where I really can appreciate whatever that was. And I just started to go through that. And in that process, I also realized how privileged I was because I happened to teach a college class 2 years before that, where I had 6 nonprofits that the students worked on as like real case studies. And one of the nonprofits was the National Kidney Foundation. And so the head of the National Kidney Foundation and I became really great friends. And lo and behold, I would need her 2 years later to point me to, hey, I want these kinds of doctors. And she gave me 3 doctors from her board and their cell phone numbers and said, here you go. And so recognizing that privilege, it's really important for me to make that accessible for others. The thought process, because we're not all executively trained, right? The thought process of how to actually know if that's a doctor for you. Not that they're a bad doctor, not that there's anything wrong with them, but that they just might not be a match for you. They may talk too fast and you're like, I don't get it. Or they may talk too slow and you're like, oh my gosh, this is, making me more anxious, right? What even just something as simple as that can totally thwart you in a crisis. So that's where I find my accountability in actually wanting to make this easier to understand and connect. Because
Mm,
I do believe at the end of the day, profound partnerships is what saves your life. Profound partnerships, what breathes into you, which is where, community is important. But every community is different. It has to be where you are really connected for what is important to you.
mm.
And in that moment of crisis, I didn't even really know what was important to me other than living,
Yeah, absolutely.
right? So even helping people identify like what really matters to you when you're in conversation, when you're in connection with someone. So that's what my company aspires to do en masse,
Mm,
such that anybody in a medical crisis, privileged or not, no matter where they are on the economic scale or the social scale, that they have some resource of like, just help me get started.
yeah.
And don't tell me what to do, but help
Mm,
me identify what I really want
yeah.
from experience, given I haven't chosen it and I'm forced to be in it.
Yeah.
And I believe it takes a person beyond empowerment. It takes them into being activated so that they have some facility about, like really tangible facility about actually how to move through this, not just a feel good motivation, inspiration, although that's very important. Without a tangible, pragmatic approach, the inspiration is great for however long it's great for, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So that's what
Yeah,
I'm really committed to now.
it's incredible. You're really giving your clients a call to action to own their own situation and, to make things happen, rather than um, wait for things to happen, which also, depending on the country they come from, could be a natural default, because in England we have a health service that we don't have to pay for, but a consequence of that is we have long waiting lists. So it can be quite inherent in us almost to wait, to be willing, almost passive, because the waiting is almost to be expected. But what I hear in what you're creating is a drive, a kind of a personal drive where somebody, and a say, where somebody is kind of catapulting the process rather than passively waiting.
Yeah.
And that there will that in itself, I would imagine, would inspire confidence in the user of your services, because waiting doesn't really yield anything other than anxiety, and it doesn't forward anything very much. It's a kind of a holding pattern. So yeah, very, very, very exciting.
Thank you. And hopefully, the expansion of us, through our growth in going globally actually makes it easier for people to make the decision to move somewhere.
Mm.
to know that the medical system is a very big part of where that person's going to live, right? Like their experience of life. And if there's a company that says, look, we're in all countries and we'll help you understand the medical system, whether you need it at that moment or even before, we can prep you for that, then it just gives people more freedom to move around the world. Because as a result of my experience, I have a heart and kidney transplant. And so my body is even a global citizen, where I already came from this mix of cultures. And then I've got a heart and kidney from I don't know where. So, I really feel like I'm a true representation of what it is to be a global citizen. And it has given me a perspective for humanity and a compassion for others that really is profound. And so I highly encourage it, which is why I was so excited to come and have this conversation with you, Claire, because I really believe that this moment in time and in culture and where we are today affords us the ability to move around the world like never before with such ease. That
Mm,
if I can contribute with my company to make that even easier and remove, a potential concern for someone to do that, I'm all in. And even without my company, having the knowing that if I can figure it out, any of us can figure it out. It's available for us to figure out. Um, I really would have anyone who has a concern about moving to just reconsider it and, go on a journey, because the
mm,
the found impact and imprint that that makes on a person's uh, way of being, their thinking, their connection to others is really profound. So
mm,
thank you for having a platform like this that just makes it that little bit easier
mm,
and to know what to expect. And I
exactly.
really appreciate being able to be here to contribute even just a little bit to your mission.
Thank you. And what do you think beyond when you were healing and you're well into your when you were well into your road of recovery, um, what what was present for you then? Because you talked about the temptation to go back to Australia, which you overrode, but did you then kind of feel a real deep connection with America as home and everything? What were you left with once you were healed?
Thank you. That's a really great question. It was mixed feelings at first, even through the journey of when I was sick. Mixed feelings being, I have these six amazing doctors. They're just so spiritual. They're kind. They uh, they had a true connection to their patients. They have a true connection to their patients' lives, like individual people. Those doctors that they don't need to look at your file to know your name.
Mm,
I was so blessed to have found these amazing doctors. And so there was this love of like, I have to be in America because they're saving my life. They're here. I don't know if that would happen in Australia for the medical system we have, right? I don't know. Because there it's kind of a default too of which doctor is available, just like the UK. Um, so there was that kind of profound gratitude. And then there was this realization we're in a country that has such an impact on the world, super developed, innovative, right? Invented the internet kind of country. And yet we have this archaic medical system that still in 2024 doesn't work for everybody. It was so discombobulating, which again informs my own mission
mm,
that I'm a highly capable person. I might not know how to do it, but I know that it needs to be done. And I know enough of the people around me that can help me get it done.
mm,
And again, those people are in America, right? So there was like this dichotomy in my healing process. And also thinking, would I have gotten kidney failure if I lived in Fiji? Water quality being different, food quality being different? I don't know. Would my stressful work habits be the same if I was in Australia, where we have Friday afternoon pretty much off with a boozy lunch, like, and we actually take the weekends. So that was there for me too, of like in my new survival, right? In my new standard of care for myself, is this the country that's actually going to support that? And then I had the realization of like, no matter where I am, I am.
mm,
And no matter where I am, I can create home, but I can also create my own level of self-care. I can also create my own level of, whatever that looks like for me. It doesn't have to be determined by the country. And now I'm here and I'm in love with it
mm,
because now I've built my home here. So that was the ultimate decision, was like, I can't go back because here is my home. Doesn't mean I can't live anywhere else. And it also doesn't mean can't go back to Australia and make a home. But inside of the community that actually supported me to live, that still to this day treat me like, I'm this precious gift on earth and I'm going to make this huge difference. And, they don't even let me cross the road in a dangerous manner, right? They're really protective because of this experience. I feel like at the end of the day, being here saved me.
mm,
It's my duty to be here to do that for others. And I feel a real pull to transform the medical industry in a profound way, a way that's real, that has tangible impact, in honor of my donor who was
mm,
29. She was American and she died on Christmas Day. In honor of my doctors who struggle through the bureaucracy to really do what they do and care for others. So I have this bond with America it's a dichotomy of like, maybe none of this would have happened if I wasn't here, but I chose it. And maybe there's a whole ton of people that don't have the choice, that are here, they were born here, have to be here, that
mm,
could really use everything I've learned.
mm.
So, at times I am a little bit split.
And
Um,
I wonder if it being split was almost increased. I'm curious how your family related to, because you're far from them. You're literally hovering between life and death, and your family are there. And that's when I often think moving country can become a real challenge for people. Is you have a life, you have a job, you have family, you have friends, you have a whole existence in one country, but you also have your family in another country who passionately care about you. How did you and they juggle all the concerns and the distance and everything through that time?
it's a really great question. Um, that's a really great question. In September 2020, after 5 years of kidney failure, I found out that I also had heart failure. And that was right in the middle of COVID. So in that discovery, my mom couldn't come to the US, for example. There was a ton of rigmarole, which I'm sure you remember. Those of us that had immigrated were like there. We had to be wherever we were. All of us in the world had to be wherever we were. But especially those that had immigrated, we weren't able to go back and be with our family and, be on lockdown with our family. That wasn't a thing. So I went through a lot of the journey for 4 months until my heart and kidney transplant, physically alone, because not only couldn't anybody come, but I also was in such a vulnerable health state, I couldn't be around anyone. Social distancing wasn't going to work for me. I had to really be isolated. So that kind of made the decision for us.
Mm,
How we maneuvered it was, I have built an amazing family here in the US out of my friends. And I had 6 amazing friends that surrounded me, and they all took different roles um, in my journey. And they were just amazing at allowing me to be. And from that, it was like family. We're
mm,
so intimate with each other. It's like we're family. So I didn't feel the gap because a lot of them have been people I'd known in my 20s, we'd really built together. I felt the gap of my mom, right? Because everybody wants their mom when you're sick. I really felt that gap. But I knew that all of it, this is where my faith kicked in. And I didn't have much of it, as you can imagine, because I thought I was going to die. But my faith kicked in that all of it was meant to happen exactly as it was. And I was just to be and breathe, which was really difficult because I'm a doer, I'm effective, I'm a leader, I get stuff done, I have the whole world. And this was a moment where I had to have the realization that the people that could help me were already doing it better than I could. And then there was a moment that it was like, I can't do anything else. I've done everything I know to do and some. And now is where my faith kicks in. And there's no other human being on earth that can help me. Now we really literally just have to wait. And it was towards Christmas. And I got put on the list on Christmas Eve, and we'd been saying it's going to be a Christmas miracle. And the next day, they said, "Oh my gosh, it's a Christmas miracle. You have a heart and a kidney." And normally it takes 2 months. So in that faith, I just had to surrender to I'm where I'm at. It's where I'm supposed to be. The people around me are the people that are supposed to be around me. And I love my family, but they're supposed to be where they're supposed to be. And we got through it with a lot of prayer. Even those in my family that aren't religious, it was like that moment in time where it was like, I'll do anything. And all we can do is pray. So, like I say, even the ones, my friends and family that aren't religious, found it in themselves to light a candle or have some representation of their own of what it was to have faith or hold the
mm,
space for a miracle to come in. And so that's where we found a common thread
mm,
was in hope. It
mm,
was in hope and faith, all different religions, all different backgrounds. I had 3,000 people praying for me, and I say praying loosely in their own way speaking to whatever the miracle maker is for them to say, now we need it.
mm,
And so it was a real cultural moment in time for me where, again, it was an equalizer. We were all on lockdown. None of us could see our family, even if they were down the street. There was all these barriers and boundaries we had to put up for physical distance. And then here I am by myself in a hospital, like hoping for the best. So I think it transcended again country barriers. It was, language. It was a hope that filled all of us. And I think we all just needed a miracle.
mm,
And so when the heart and kidney came, it was a true miracle because it's again average 2 months. And then the next day, 3 hours before surgery, I flatlined. And that's when it became a real miracle because I was set to die the next day if we hadn't said we want a Christmas miracle and done all the things to lead us to that moment in time to be ready for it.
mm,
So I think at the end of the day, it didn't matter to us physically where we were. It matters that we were connected and focused on she's got this, we've got this, that, like the miracle maker's got this. And it really did transcend all of the demographic belief systems, everything, because it was like, a moment in time. It was like one of us in humanity is in need,
mm,
and unfortunately, it's what happens, when the world is going through something, when there's a devastation somewhere, no matter what it's caused by man or nature, right? Unfortunately, those moments of tragedy and suffering are when we find it easiest to connect.
mm,
And they seem to be the moments where it's so obvious that all the other barriers don't matter. And unfortunately, we have to get to that point more often than not. But
mm.
that's where I see moving countries really matters because you can get there from an adventure as
Yeah,
opposed to having some
from a
big,
crisis.
yeah, some big tragedy or crisis to have you bond with other humans. You
Mm,
can get there from traveling,
mm.
which is
So
exciting.
true.
It's an adventure. You can make that connection, which is why I loved the tourism industry.
Mm, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's interesting that you say as you were speaking, you then went on to say it was another example of an equalizer. And in many ways, I was thinking you were the equalizer, because you were the point of reference that 3,000 people are centered on. And yes, like you said, now it's irrelevant of whether someone has faith or not. It's what they bring to it, whatever works for them, and they brought whatever worked for them, but all centered on a common culture again. So it's really fascinating how almost everything in your life has shaped up to be true to who you are. You said earlier, I am, and you know, as a statement, and everything you're saying is almost like a demonstration of that kind of handed down from your ancestors. It's quite fascinating. You are literally living what you and working what you're speaking, if that makes sense. Well, obviously it makes sense to you because it's your life, but listening in, it's really incredible.
Thank you. I appreciate that observation, that insight. It's interesting. You would think it was intentional.
Mm,
It's so not. You know, when I get present to it in conversations like this, but I had no game plan. I thought I was going to be the head of a, Fortune 500 company in corporate America, which is why I came over here. It was just a whole different world. But I do think that there is a predestined purpose for each of us. Um, and I think we're in a moment in culture at the moment where it's like, go find your purpose, go and discover your purpose, which again is why a lot of people travel too, which I love, right? Whatever's going to get you exploring, I'm a fan of. But I think what I've discovered in all of the moves that I have made, and all of those moments of um, itchy feet that I've had of like, let me go do something else, I need a change, like in those moments. I think ultimately what I have discovered is that in getting down to what do I really want? Like in my real gut of like, what do I really want? What's actually going to fulfill me in this world of so many options of what it could be? And when I've been able to tap into that, that's where my purpose is. The
mm,
next thing I do is my purpose because it's so, it's just so pure, when we're given the room to just actually express. And sometimes it's what I really want is to just bum around for a second. I just want to lay around for a couple of days. And even that, right? It doesn't have to be, I really want to save the world. But even just like that for right now, I think every time you tap into those moments and indulge yourself, it helps you get more expressive to be able to identify, I really want this
mm,
and live to that moment by moment.
yeah.
I definitely didn't have a life plan to arrive at this point. And anytime I thought I did, it was like a plot twist. Just kidding. I don't have a life plan.
Brilliant.
Thank you.
And what took you from LA to San Diego? Because I know it's still California, but it's very different.
Yes, it's two completely different worlds. Speaking of moves, I got offered a job, which was a big job in my world back then, right? Like one of those like glossy jobs. And I thought it was amazing. And this is where I'll go anywhere for this job. And that it's San Diego and it's beautiful and the beaches are right here. I got no problem with it. But I came to San Diego with, I'm going to do this job and I'm going home back to LA. It was always the plan. Um, so I came down. Turns out I didn't love that job. It wasn't authentic to who I am. The job itself was amazing. The company was amazing. It just wasn't me. And I realized that within 6 months. And then I ended up here with this big house. And I was like, what am I doing? Like the house isn't me, the place isn't me, my clothes aren't me. I had that kind of a moment. Um, and I thought, all right, I'm going to get a job, go back to LA, back into advertising, and I'll just go back to my old life. Again, plot twist. I had two buy parties in February of 2020. And then I wrote a lease for LA. I signed a lease for LA. And a week before moving, we were on lockdown. And so I said to the lease, this looks like it's going to be, I don't know, a couple of weeks to a month. Let me give you the apartment back, and then I'll find another one in a month or so, and I'll just move up slowly when I'm ready. Well, the lockdown ended up being around 18 months here. And we moved the whole office remotely. I was the COO of an advertising agency then, which was in LA, but then after remote work, it was everywhere. And then when I finished up, and then I had my heart and kidney transplant, which was even better to heal in San Diego because LA was so packed full of people and COVID that they said get as far away as possible within driving distance. So that worked out. So I ended up rehabbing here. And my job after that was also remote, where I led the uh, distribution team globally for Virgin Voyages for Richard Branson.
Mm,
So it just made sense. And that took me all the way up to last year when I began to develop this company. And this one's remote too. So I'm staying. And there's a sense of nature that San Diego has that's accessible, where you can pull into the parking lot of the beach and just walk 10 feet on the sand and you're in the water.
mm,
That world is so appealing to me. I really love that about this particular city,
mm,
that it's spacious. There's a beach culture that's really beautiful and accessible. It's just not too much fluff, if that makes sense.
mm,
LA has a little bit more pizzazz and maneuvering, still similar landscape, but a bit more pizzazz and maneuvering, which I actually think I'm ready for now. So the plan is that I'm moving back to Los Angeles in the next month or so. But even in that, given it's a place that I've moved to before, that I've lived in before, I'm moving with a newness and with the commitment to get to know the city newly now, with who I am now, with who the city is now, and developing a whole new relationship, brand new versus a
mm,
not. I know what LA is like. Really setting that aside and moving with a new adventure.
mm. Amazing. And can I ask you a seemingly frivolous a question after these quite deep explorations we've had? So I absolutely love San Diego, and I'm really curious whether that you've been to three of my favorite places in San Diego.
Please.
So have you been whale watching?
I haven't. I've been whale watching in Australia, but I haven't done it in San Diego. I might have to before I go, actually.
Yeah, I really recommend it. I was quite seasick because I get seasick very easily, but it was phenomenal. And I know many people are split on the opinion of a zoo, but San Diego is home to a vast zoo. So it's unlike many zoos where you literally need a vehicle to traverse the zoo. So if you're not
Yes,
entirely anti-zoo, have you been to the zoo?
I have been multiple times. I think it's an amazing zoo. It's a conservation zoo. They do an amazing
Exactly.
Yeah, they do it amazing. They've got an outback section with koalas and all kinds of stuff. So I'm a big fan. To your point, I'm not necessarily a fan of a zoo, but I'm a fan of how they do it here, specifically in San Diego Zoo. It's a global, iconic approach. I think
Mm,
it's very innovative, and it's definitely ahead of the rest.
mm,
Um, and I believe they do a really amazing job of the care that they take. Not everyone gets it right all the time, but their attention is definitely on it, and you feel it palpably when you go. I
mm.
would like to think it's more like a wildlife park that's in an enclosed area, but it's enormous.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I was really wowed, and fortunately, when I went, we planned a whole day, which you need because
Yes,
there is so
exactly.
much to discover, and it's incredible. And my final place was I know there's way more to San Diego. I have done the wonderful the duck tour type thing. I don't think it's called a duck tour, but the trolley bus tour.
Yes.
I've
Yeah.
done that. That was absolutely phenomenal. You need a day for that because there's so much history in San Diego to explore. And I've been to that amazing island, beginning with a C. Name escapes me.
Coronado.
Oh my God, I love Coronado.
Beautiful.
Absolutely incredible. But my final piece was, have you been to the Top Gun bar?
No, I haven't. That definitely has to be on the list. Good call. I
So
love
yeah, so
that.
yeah, you have to go there before you go, before you leave. It's so fun. It's just a lovely little minuscule little bar. It's tiny.
Oh my goodness. Well,
Um,
thank you, because I definitely have to go. Being an 80s child, there's no other way I can leave San Diego without making a trip. I'll absolutely put it on the list as going before I leave.
Yeah, it's fun just to go where Top Gun was filmed, and it's brilliant. It's brilliant. So well, that's a nice light note to end on. But I have absolutely loved everything. On a serious note, I absolutely thank you for what you brought to this conversation today. And I feel like I could keep talking to you with the different strands of the East Timor, the history. I think there are so many aspects that we could have delved into deeper. And I just really thank you for your take and your share and what you're up to in the world. Thank you.
Thank you, Claire, and thank you for creating this platform. It takes a lot of courage. It takes a lot of courage to start anything newly. And the fact that you started it a couple of years ago and, really tapped into, um, have really tapped into, I believe, the concerns that people have with traveling the world or wondering can they move somewhere, for what is at stake in compassion for others. I really appreciate the ability that you have created for me to even be on here to talk about this stuff, because I truly think that travel is a deep connector for having compassion for others.
Mm, absolutely. No, I really appreciate that. Thank you.